So throughout this Lenten season, we have been focusing on the story, where God's story intersects our own story. Members of the congregation have written some amazing devotions, which will continue to come to your email all the way till Easter. We have had some very interesting discussions in our small study groups, and so far we have heard the testimonies of Sue and Steve on Wednesday evenings, both of which were truly inspirational. Next Wednesday, we hear from high school senior Chloe, and that will be followed by Quinn on the 29th. We hope you will join us. The first Wednesday that we gathered, I shared a bit of history around the concept of giving one's personal testimony. For those of you who were there, I apologize for the repetition, but I think it's important to know that many years ago, back when I was in seminary in the 80s, we were taught that you should never use the word I in a sermon. Sermons were supposed to be a theological analysis of the biblical text only. And if you really had to break down and use a sermon illustration, you could find one in a book. Yes, they actually used to sell those things, books. It was okay if you used someone else's story, but never one of your own. Well, since that time, preaching has changed. It has become clear that while every sermon needs to point directly to God, pastors need to show their authentic faith, how God carries us through the ups and the downs of faith. One scholar who greatly contributed to this shift in preaching is Dr. Anna Carter Florence. She is the preaching professor at Columbia Seminary in Decatur. In her book entitled Preaching as Testimony, she explains that before the ordination of women, a tradition developed that allowed women to give not a sermon in the church, but their testimony on the front steps of the church building. So before the real worship began. She also points out that in history, there were a number of times when more people came to the testimony outside than the formal service inside the building. And given that this practice developed predominantly among more revivalistic traditions, the concept of giving your testimony was viewed as being fairly suspect in more liturgical traditions like Lutheranism. But this year, we're trying to revive that concept of testimony because it does not have to be limited to revivals or informal gatherings of faith. Like giving an eyewitness account when you testify in court, to testify to your faith simply means the act of speaking your truth, telling others of your personal experience with God. Unlike giving testimony in court, it really doesn't matter what other people think about your testimony. Instead, your word draws them into curiosity to come and see for yourself. So only you and God know the authenticity of your faith. Only you can tell your story, and everyone has a story to tell. Today's gospel reading is the actual text that gave birth to this Lenten theme. As we read it in our worship planning group, we were struck by how many times this man who had been healed was required to tell his story. First, his neighbors weigh in. Is this the same guy who was born blind? Some say yes, some say no, but he holds on to his truth. This man named Jesus healed me. Then the Pharisees get involved, some saying Jesus is evil for healing on the Sabbath, others honestly confused by Jesus' signs, and still others doubting if this man had ever been blind. But the man who is healed holds on to his truth. He put mud in my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. So they call in the parents who acknowledge, yes, he's our son. Yes, he was born blind, but they go no further. He's of age. Ask him. So they ask the man yet again, and he clearly, directly tells his story, the one that only he can tell. I don't know whether that man is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. And when the Pharisees challenge him further, he simply responds, here's the astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And get this man's testimony takes place before he understands who Jesus is. His experience of Jesus precedes his knowledge of Jesus. He does not wait until he has all of the answers figured out before he shares his faith with others. He simply speaks his spiritual truth. Over the past few weeks, I have been so blessed to hear a number of your testimonies. Some of you have enclosed your story in a confidential email. Some of you who have sent things to me that are ready for publication, while still others are still trying to figure out their story. It's in an embryonic stage, just taking place. But they have all been beautiful testimonies of how God is at work in your life. And they are stories that only you can tell. And they are stories that our brothers and sisters, our friends and our neighbors, our co-workers and even strangers desperately need to hear. Now, at this point in the sermon, I could share with you some frightening statistics that necessitate the telling of our faith stories. I could tell you the fact that today, just 63% of Americans describe themselves as Christians, down from 75% just 10 years ago. Or I could tell you the fact that regular worship attendance among professing Christians dropped from 34% in 2019 to 28% in 2021. That's a 6 percentage point drop in just 2 years, and that includes all those who have worshiped online as well. The decades-old steady decline in church affiliation accelerated during the pandemic, resulting in a record number of churches closing their doors. Or I could tell you about the World Health Organization's report that clinical levels of anxiety and depression increased by a staggering 25% in the first year of the pandemic. Or that suicide is the 12th leading cause of death in the U.S., with an estimated 1.2 million suicide attempts in 2020. Or we could look at the fact that 18% of all children in the U.S. live below the poverty level, that is, with a household income below $25,000 a year. But as dire as these statistics are, we do not tell our story of faith out of desperation or out of fear. We do so out of love. Our world, our neighbors, our friends need to hear some good news. They need to hear the stories of a God who brings hope and healing to people's lives. They need to be part of a community that supports one another, that provides for one another, that accompanies one another through the anxiety and the depression. They need to learn of a God who loves them completely, forgives them unconditionally, and created them beautifully. They need to know that even in seasons of darkness and pain, even as we prepare for the death of Good Friday, Sunday is coming. Resurrection is just around the corner. Our God is not finished with us yet. So I challenge you, people, be bold. Tell your story. Tell others how you experience God in your life. Tell people about your church. Dispel their assumption that Christians are just a bunch of narrow-minded, phobic party poopers. Give them a glimpse of what Christian community really looks like, what it means to struggle with your faith in a safe environment, and what it feels like to be carried in prayer when you can't muster hope on your own. Tell your story, what you know, clearly, concisely, intentionally. One thing I do know, though I was blind, now I see. It can be as simple as that. For we have a God of amazing grace who loves this world that is hurting so deeply. And we are God's messengers. Tell the story. Amen.